Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Tonight's webinar is on compassion and veterinary wellbeing. We have got people joining us as we go through over the next couple of minutes, but what I will do is I will get started on our introductions and our housekeeping, and if you miss anything, please don't worry, we will make sure that everything comes through on the chat for you as well. So, this is a research webinar that we are presenting here this evening. And we have RCVS Mind Matters Research Grant recipients Dr. Catherine Wakelin and Sarah Cawthorne, who will be here this evening, and they will be discussing the importance of self-compassion, provide an overview of their research and take part with a Q&A towards the end. Their recent research involved conducting a randomised control trial to investigate the effectiveness of online compassion-focused therapy intervention, and they will explain much more in detail about this very shortly. Catherine qualified as a clinical psychologist from the University of Surrey in 2021 after completing her doctoral studies in clinical psychology, and her special interests are in complex trauma and compassion. Sarah is a trainee clinical psychologist at the University of Surrey, and she works part-time in the NHS, rotating through different mental health placements, and then part-time in research and teaching at the university. And Sarah will qualify as a clinical psychologist at the end of this month. For those of you who haven't come across Mind Matters before, or MMI as we tend to call ourselves, our aim is to improve the mental health and wellbeing of those in the broadest possible veterinary team. So this will include students, nurses, surgeons and practice managers, but many more who are involved in veterinary work. MMI was launched in 2015 and is funded and run by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, the regulatory body and Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons and Nurses in the UK. So for those of you who are joining us live, we are using Zoom webinar this evening. Most of you will probably be familiar with the functions, but we do have some key buttons here if you haven't used this before. If you would like to ask any questions this evening, then we would love to hear from you. You will need to put these in the Q&A box so that Sam, who is here, who's one of our MMI senior officers, he will be sorting through these. And where it's possible to provide a link to a resource or something similar, then Sam will put these in the chat box. For all of the others, there will be the opportunity for you as the audience to upvote questions that you would like to see answered. These questions won't be answered immediately, but they will help us prioritise our time at the end. We are aiming to wrap up the presentation by around 7:45, which should give us roughly 15 minutes for questions and discussion at the end. So as I say, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. We have got the chat box turned on this evening, so if you would like to introduce yourselves, say a little bit about who you are, where you're from, what your role is, then please feel free to add that into the chat and to share any other sort of thoughts as we go along. The other buttons that you will see, there are captions available to you. This function is turned on, so if you would like to utilise this service, please feel free to do so. We will be recording this webinar so that you might be able to watch it back if you don't manage to stay with us for the whole thing, but you might also want to share with colleagues, and we will make it available for those who perhaps missed that tonight was happening. Only the speakers will be visible and audible on this webinar, so you can sit back and enjoy, and don't worry, what you put in the chat won't be shared as part of the recorded webinar. So I think that's everything about how Zoom runs, but if you've got any questions or if you need any support or help this evening, then do feel free either to put something in the chat box or to contact Sam or Chloe, who's here from the events team, who will be able to help you with any technical questions. As with all of our activities, we will signpost now and then we will also signpost throughout the event to sources of support and help. So if you are affected by any of the content, then please make sure that you do get in touch. VetLife, Samaritans and the others listed are all 24-hour services that you can reach out to. If none of the organisations here listed are quite right, then please look at the MMI resource page, which has very specific helplines for different issues that you may be facing. And again, please make sure that you do make use of these services if you require them. So I want to hand you over to Catherine and Sarah, who will take you through everything this evening on compassion. And then when we get to around 7:45, we will wrap up and we will move into the questions. So I hope that you are able to enjoy yourselves here this evening. We're really glad to have everybody here, and I'm very excited to have our discussion towards the end of this, because I think that we will have something that is really useful and helpful going forward. So Catherine, Sarah, over to you. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Mohammed. And Howard's always given a lovely introduction, but obviously I'm Catherine and this is Sarah. So we're going to be talking to you this evening about our research within the veterinary field and particularly around compassion. So to start off with, in terms of background, so firstly, self-criticism is the process of negative self-evaluation and self-scrutiny, accompanied by a lot of intense emotions such as anger and self-contempt. And I guess what research shows time and time again is that individuals with higher self-criticism tend to have poorer outcomes in traditional therapies, particularly things like CBT or cognitive therapy that are traditionally quite effective for low mood or anxiety. And this is perhaps because self-critical individuals might struggle to build more of a positive therapeutic relationship with their therapist, which I guess what we know is this is particularly understandable considering that high self-criticism associates with lots of inconsistent attention from early caregivers or challenges in kind of development of attachment patterns earlier on in life. So Sarah, I know you're going to kind of speak a little bit now about resilience.
Yeah, happy to. So I guess the other construct that we were kind of looking at that feels really relevant to compassion and to vets is this kind of idea of resilience. It's sort of defined as this ability to kind of bounce back or to recover from stressful experiences. Um, Research suggests, though, that resilience is actually lower in veterinarians than in the general population, which may or may not surprise you guys to hear. And there's some research kind of into why that might be. It's thought to be kind of a combination of things, as with anything. So one of the key things is kind of industry-related factors, long working hours, often kind of quite limited supervision opportunities. Um, Also kind of trait-based factors. So things like perfectionism is really, really high in veterinarians, research tells us, kind of striving for really high standards that people set for themselves. And then sort of when they inevitably fall short of those really, really high standards, clinicians often feel a lot of anxiety, stress, low mood, and things like that that can be really, really tough to deal with. So there's sort of the personality kind of side of things as well. But then also kind of a really key part of this is thinking about kind of the moral dilemmas that vets often experience in their roles. As I'm sure you all listening will know, in kind of a veterinary role, often you'll be faced with sort of dilemmas like kind of convenience euthanasia, when, for example, an owner might ask you to kind of put down an animal because they perhaps can't afford costly treatment, rather than because it's necessarily in that animal's best interest. And so these sorts of dilemmas can lead to what we call kind of moral injury, compassion fatigue, and burnout. And so I think the really tricky thing about this resilience is that those sort of moral dilemmas can contribute to that lower resilience, but also having that lower resilience can make you more vulnerable to the distress caused by those dilemmas. So it's a little bit of a vicious circle, if you like. But there's lots of research telling us that actually kind of self-care and relaxation practices can bolster that resilience that we know to be lower than average in vets. And vets with greater self-compassion are also kind of thought to be more resilient, which is really exciting, and sort of leads on to our research. So I'll hand you back to Catherine to talk us through that.
Mm. Thank you, Sarah. And so I guess that really sets the scene really for self-compassion, and which is really received sort of growing attention as the antidote to self-criticism and low resilience. And I guess cultivating self-compassion is about enabling individuals to develop the ability to self-reassure, to counteract that internal self-critical voice. And the sort of the definition, I guess, of self-compassion from a compassion-focused therapy perspective is it's essentially this sensitivity to suffering in oneself and others, but then with a commitment to try and alleviate that and prevent that from returning. So I guess that requires quite a lot of insight and wisdom to recognize ourselves when we are struggling rather than kind of avoiding that. And then a lot of courage to actually face up to what am I going to do about that? How are we going to try and prevent this vicious cycle from continuing? So essentially the aim of compassion focused therapy, which is really a growing therapeutic modality within the research field, broader than veterinarians, but just kind of across the psychology, I guess, scope at the moment. So the aim is to move individuals with high levels of self-criticism, particularly, so high self-criticism and shame, from operating in quite a kind of competitive sort of drive system to actually have more being able to a compassion motivation system. We'll go on to talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But so a little bit of background to our RCT. So I guess more broadly, I conducted a meta-analysis before our current papers that we'll discuss. And essentially that was to estimate the overall effect of compassion-related interventions on self-criticism more broadly. So not in the vet population specifically, but just in more broadly terms. And had about 20 papers and found really good, interesting findings that actually self-compassion related interventions produced a significant reduction in self-criticism in comparison with control groups. And this was moderated by various factors in terms of kind of longer interventions and kind of when kind of more robust active controls were used. And this has been quite exciting because I guess the compassion focused therapy literature has been kind of growing over the years. So this is one of the biggest meta-analysis and actually looking at the variable self-criticism certainly to date. So that's been really promising for the field. So if you're interested, you can always kind of look up the paper because it has been published since. But essentially that was sort of the meta-analysis that sort of set the tone of the field. But what went on to do initially, so I conducted as part of my doctoral thesis, a feasibility research study. So knowing that veterinarians have a higher suicide rate than the general population, and we know face a higher prevalence of moral challenges, have high levels of perfectionism and psychological distress, essentially we thought that the compassion focused therapy interventions could be quite a good fit. And the research shows that the more perfectionistic a veterinarian is, the less able to tolerate uncertainty and that higher risk of internalizing those difficulties of practice and becoming self-critical for kind of and feeling a sense of failure. So what we did, so I guess knowing that in the vet field, the struggles are facing, and then knowing that the evidence suggests that compassion-focused therapy is effective at reducing self-criticism, the feasibility study I developed was a two-week compassion-based intervention for 128 vets. So we watched one video every week for 2 weeks, and what we showed was it was very feasible as an intervention and showed good kind of signs of preliminary effectiveness because perfectionism, work-related rumination and self-criticism all significantly reduced over the intervention, and they were maintained over follow-up. This was all took place in the COVID-19 pandemic. So it showed really impressive feasibility and preliminary effectiveness considering the kind of the challenges particularly vets were facing as a kind of frontline healthcare profession at the time. So again, this paper's now been published, and would really recommend looking this up if you are interested. It's in Vet Record, and this I guess set the scene essentially for us applying for the Sarah Brown Mind Matters grant, which we kind of really successfully and excitedly awarded, which enabled us to expand this preliminary feasibility study into a bigger randomized controlled trial with more robust methodological design, which Sarah's going to present for us in a minute. So yeah, Mind Matters has been a fantastic part of supporting this research grow from early phases into now kind of more robust trial, which Sarah's now going to present for you.
Thanks, Catherine. So yeah, as Catherine kind of explained, we were very kind of excited to get the results of Catherine's feasibility research. It was really, really promising. But then what that meant was that the natural next step was to scale the research up. And I guess that's where I came in as part of my doctoral kind of research. I basically kind of helped to develop this randomized control trial and then ran it and so on. Effectively, the aim of that RCT was to extend Catherine's kind of original research to kind of explore the efficacy of this 2-week online compassionate imagery intervention for improving vet mental well-being. Based on Catherine's findings, and I guess based on research as well, what we were kind of hoping or expecting to find was that the intervention group would experience an increase in self-reassurance, self-compassion and resilience, paired with a reduction in perfectionism, self-criticism, what we call work-related rumination, and fears of compassion as well. So those were our kind of hypotheses. can move on to the next slide. Perfect, thank you so much. So yeah, as I mentioned, we kind of adopted this RCT design. What that meant, for anyone who kind of isn't familiar with RCT, is that we basically had two groups. So not everybody received the intervention immediately. We basically randomly allocated anyone who signed up to either receive the intervention immediately, or to be on the waitlist control group where they received it after a 10-week delay. And basically all that meant was that we could, by doing this, establish whether it was truly the intervention that led to the increases and the improvements in well-being that Catherine had seen. Because without that control group, it's hard to definitively say, if that makes sense. So that was our design. In terms of recruitment, we were looking at student and qualified vets. So we basically targeted Surrey Veterinary School. We were very, very lucky to have them at our disposal, really. They were really, really helpful. Lots of lecture shout outs, lots of flyers, also social media. We were really, really kind of struck by how engaged the veterinary community were with our research, and how willing everyone was to kind of spread the news and share our kind of study. So we were really, really, kind of grateful for that. It made all of this possible, and it basically meant that we were able to reach our target, which was really, really exciting, and actually exceed our target for recruitment. Just to kind of mention randomization, we kind of stratified that. So we tried to make sure that there was the same number of qualified and student vets in each arm of the RCT. And that's an example there on the side of our flyer. So people in this webinar may well have seen this. They may well be sick of the sight of this. Thank you for kind of anyone who did share or take part. It was so appreciated. So I guess just to talk you through our sample then, as mentioned, it was student and qualified vets. We kind of specifically wanted to look at people who hadn't already been receiving any kind of compassion-based or cognitive intervention. And that was just because we wanted to make sure that if there were improvements, we could say it was pretty much definitely because of our intervention. We also kind of had to make sure that they hadn't participated in Catherine's original trial. So those were our inclusion criteria. We recruited internationally, so kind of any vet from any kind of country were eligible to take part. In the end, as I mentioned, we managed to really exceed our target. So we'd been hoping for 120 participants, just to ensure that we kind of had enough data to do our analysis. And again, that 120 was predicted based on thinking that 50% of people would drop out. And that's just based on what we kind of noticed in the feasibility study. But yeah, we managed to get 162. So that was wonderful. As mentioned, kind of through university pages, through general social media, and word of mouth and things like that. In terms of what the sample actually looked like, it was 74% qualified vets. So there were slightly more qualified than student vets. I think there are a few reasons for that, partly because we were recruiting during exam season. And so it was quite hard for the students to kind of commit the time, which is understandable, of course. It was majority female as well in the sample, 89%, and the mean age was around 36 years. So yeah, that was our sample. I think we had kind of hoped to have perhaps a slightly more, I guess, diverse sample. Doesn't say on this slide here, but the majority ethnicity was also white European, white British. And I guess there's a few reasons that I have in mind as to why it might not have been more diverse, but I think probably actually it represents the veterinary industry as a whole, that kind of representation. My understanding anyway is that there have been kind of moves to kind of make veterinary kind of professions more accessible and to kind of, I guess, widen participation. But my understanding from kind of research is that it is generally a majority white profession still, despite these efforts. And so it's possible that our kind of sample sort of reflects the state of the profession at the moment anyway. As you can see here, we have some graphs to kind of reflect that. So yeah, just took gender and ethnicity as an example, but that's the breakdown there on those slides. But what about the intervention itself? So I guess, as we kind of already kind of mentioned, it's a 2-week online intervention for improving vet mental well-being, focused on kind of compassion and building those self-compassion skills. So people in the intervention group were asked to watch one video every day for 14 days. The videos were 10 to 15 minutes in length, and they covered kind of various different topics. Initially, it kind of started out as what we call psychoeducation, so trying to build understanding of really kind of key core skills and concepts in kind of compassion focused work. We'll come back onto that shortly. We've got a video to show you as a little example of that. But once participants had watched those videos, we then moved on to kind of building those self-compassion techniques, mindfulness, and what we call soothing rhythm breathing. And then finally, it sort of moves on to thinking about building imagery kind of skills, imagining kind of expressing compassion towards yourself who is struggling, for example, or imagining compassion from an ideal, compassionate other. So that was something that we really were trying to build in our intervention. And as mentioned, we kind of randomly allocated people to either access it immediately or to access it after 10 weeks. So importantly, everyone who signed up was able to access the intervention. But to kind of honour the design, the waitlist only received it once all of their questionnaires had been completed. And just on the slide there, you can see some images of what some of the videos looked like. Catherine is really creative, and so she kind of made all of these beautiful animations that we then did voiceovers for, and so that was kind of what the videos looked like. We could move on to the next slide. I think we have an example for you all, so hopefully this will work and you'll hear. If anyone can't hear, please let us know.
Is that we have 3 major emotion regulation systems: threat, here in red, drive, and soothing, which is called the 3 systems model. So the threat system evolved to alert and direct our attention to things that are dangerous in the world. And it also motivates us to engage in protective and safety-seeking responses, so that during the presence of a threat, you might feel threat emotions such as anger, anxiety, and disgust, which urge the body to act and do things such as fight, run away, or freeze if necessary, and also prompts cautious thinking such as better safe than sorry, and focusing on the negative in order to keep us safe. Now, the threat system can become more sensitive if we have external experiences of being bullied or criticised or threatened by caregivers, teachers, partners, friends, or people around us, anyone who's important in your life. It can also be triggered internally by worry and self-criticism though. For example, if you start worrying whether you made the right decision, or kind of really beating yourself up about something that perhaps didn't go so well, which links back to the unhelpful new brain, old brain loops that were previously mentioned. And so this threat system doesn't operate alone, so it operates in relation to the other 2. And this blue circle here represents the drive system, which evolved to direct our attention to fulfilling our basic needs of food, shelter, and sexual opportunities. This system motivates us to pursue opportunities that meet our needs, so that when we successfully fulfill these needs, we experience a burst of positive emotions which are pleasurable and make us more likely to engage in these behaviours again. So it's quite motivating, and this system is linked to positive emotions such as joy and elation, and it's associated with inquisitive thinking, such as working to learn a new skill, hobby, or training to do something, all stimulate the drive system. However, the soothing system in green is also related to positive emotions. However, this system comes online to facilitate periods of calmness and peacefulness when we're not seeking to achieve something and not feeling threatened. It is linked to feeling a sense of soothing and to a number of physiological responses which are associated with calming and slowing the body down. Over time, this system for calming was adapted within mammals to be linked to the experiences of attachment, caring, and interpersonal connection. But external triggers such as experiencing affection and kindness with others can help develop and stimulate this system. But over time, some of us are also able to trigger this system internally through certain types of processes, such as being self-reassuring, soothing, and remembering the times that we have felt loved for and cared for. This soothing system naturally has a very calming and regulating impact on our threat system and also keeps the drive in check. It might also be helpful to spend a moment thinking about how these 3 systems are working in your life at the moment. For example, how often do you experience each system and what tends to trigger them? Do you find one system is triggered more frequently or powerfully than others? Do they get triggered in different ways, depending on the situation?
Fantastic. Thank you, Catherine. So yeah, that's just one example of one of the, like a snippet from one of the videos, but that's a really kind of key theory within compassion focused therapy, and sort of forms the basis for a lot of the intervention. Moving on to that kind of method then, we've talked about the intervention itself, but how did we assess whether it was kind of effective in improving well-being? Well, we used kind of questionnaires. We administered questionnaires at 4 different intervals, immediately pre-intervention, if you were in the intervention group, then immediately post, 2 weeks later, and then a month later, and then another month later. So it was a 10-week study. All participants completed all the questionnaires, whether or not they did the intervention. And then we were able to run some stats on that data. I won't bore you with the actual outcome measures that we used, but they're here on the slide. But effectively, we were looking at self-criticism and self-reassurance, perfectionism, resilience, rumination, fears of compassion, and self-compassion. Those were our 6 kind of target outcomes based on research. So this kind of looks at the kind of flow of the study. Again, I don't want to bore you with this too much, but it's kind of just demonstrates that we randomized, we split people into each group, and then they completed their measures at each time point. But I would just draw your attention to the fact that there was slightly more participant data for the control group than the intervention group when all the outcome measures were completed. And there's lots of possible reasons for that. But I think what we as a team kind of discussed was that probably the fact that the waitlist control group were only getting access to the intervention when they completed all of their measures probably motivated them to kind of keep doing them, because there were quite a lot of questionnaires. Whereas the intervention group kind of arguably, once they'd received the intervention, it wasn't quite as motivating to keep doing the questionnaires. So that's one theory as to why. But in any case, we had 101 participants in our final sample, and that was enough for our analysis, which was brilliant. So yeah, some attrition, but kind of nothing kind of unexpected, and actually better than we'd expected based on the feasibility study. So yeah, 101 participants in that final sample, which is exciting. And yeah, 35% attrition. So what did we actually find? Well, yeah, we were really, really excited to kind of emulate the kind of really positive findings that Catherine had achieved in her feasibility research. What you can see here is in that column on the left, these are the outcomes that significantly changed following the intervention. And on the right, they're the ones that didn't. But yeah, we basically found significant and clinically significant changes to lots of the outcomes, including self-reassurance, resilience, self-compassion, 2 facets of work-related rumination, and also 1 facet of self-criticism. So yeah, that was really, really exciting. And it kind of suggests that this intervention really has had a positive, tangible impact on the well-being of the participants who engaged with it. And yeah, the stats suggested that that was associated with kind of really strong effect sizes, small to medium and medium to large, and was maintained at follow-up. So again, really promising. On the next slide, I think I've just included a few graphs just to kind of demonstrate just a few of those changes. So what you can see here is that blue line is the intervention group, the green line is the control group. And I guess effectively it just demonstrates that in that intervention group, over time, those scores shot up, whereas for the control group, the same couldn't be said, which was really exciting to establish. So moving on to the kind of next slide, I guess just to kind of think about what we actually kind of concluded or could find from these studies. As mentioned, it suggests that the intervention is kind of effective, definitively effective at improving various indicators of mental well-being, and it supported most of our hypotheses and supported those findings that Catherine achieved as well. Interestingly, we did find that resilience improved, which kind of actually wasn't a finding from the feasibility study. It's hard to kind of say exactly why that might be. One idea, though, is that Catherine's feasibility research took place in the COVID pandemic. It was kind of that very kind of early outbreak. Arguably, resilience was depleted kind of globally, and so it might be that that kind of affected the ability of quite a short intervention to boost resilience in her sample. But nevertheless, we did find that resilience increased, which was great. I guess just one note is that perfectionism didn't actually change, which we had predicted it might. Again, I guess there's lots of reasons for that, which I've kind of nodded to on this slide here. But I guess one idea is that our sample actually had really quite high perfectionism rates at the beginning, higher than the feasibility research. And so it might be that the perfectionism levels were just so high that it was unrealistic that it would really ever change over the course of a brief 2-week intervention. One other idea is that it might just be that perfectionism is quite a stable construct, and so perhaps we wouldn't really expect perfectionism to change anyway if it's kind of a stable construct rather than a trait that fluctuates. Could also be due to the measure we use to measure perfectionism. So one of the kind of dimensions of the questionnaire we did use looked at like parental criticism and childhood experiences, and arguably no matter how good an intervention was, it might be quite a tall order for a compassion intervention to change, your experiences from childhood retrospectively. So yeah, lots of ideas as to why perfectionism didn't change, but nevertheless, we were really, really pleased with what we did find. And it was very, very exciting. So kind of just moving on then to think about the strengths and kind of weaknesses of the research. As with any research, I think one of the real strengths was that it was this RCT robust design, so we could really kind of definitively say that this intervention had an impact on the participants, which is exciting. Adherence and attrition were really good, and for a low cost intervention of this nature, they were kind of really good. It's a remote intervention too, so that was another real strength, that we understand that as clinicians, often vets might not have access to kind of a clinic or a therapy space. They might be working quite rurally, quite remotely. So having an intervention that they can watch on their phones, on their laptops, wherever they are, is a real bonus. And that 2-month follow-up period did suggest that the findings endured, which is again a real strength of the study. But of course, there are always weaknesses to research, and I think just to name a couple of those, kind of limited sample diversity, as mentioned. Blinding wasn't possible either. So what it meant was that I was analysing the data, but I did also know who was in all of the groups, and so that's just a resource issue. I guess it's possible that kind of affected the results, but we tried to treat all participants regardless of arm exactly the same to kind of minimize any bias. And there was some missing data, so I guess that's something to bear in mind as well. It's possible that kind of could inflate the treatment effect if participants who remained in the study were remaining because it was working for them. So that's always a risk in research like this. But in any case, we were really, really pleased with what we found, that the intervention led to lots of improvements across lots of indicators of well-being relevant to vets. And that's kind of the RCT portion of the webinar. Whistle-stop tour really, but I'll hand back to Catherine now to think about clinical impact and what we're actually going to do with these findings now.
Well, thank you, Sarah. So, I think one of the most exciting parts of this research, other than seeing it grow and seeing it kind of follow through, I guess, from an initial feasibility research, then actually an established kind of evidence-based intervention, has actually been the kind of the dissemination of it and the real enthusiasm within the veterinarian community to receive that and be part of that. So first of all, we've I guess we partnered quite heavily with that department at the University of Surrey throughout kind of my thesis, and then the randomized control trial as well. So after various kind of sort of curriculum meetings, we have embedded the course is now kind of embedded throughout Surrey Uni students' veterinary kind of undergraduate degree. So at various points in the curriculum where it kind of fits, they're kind of routinely signposted to the course as a free course they're able to access through their kind of Moodle portal, which is just a really great kind of ongoing, I think, impact of the study that's kind of hopefully going to be part of those students early on, I guess, career development, and I guess beginning to have these conversations sooner rather than later. I think it's really helpful in terms of kind of prevention and early intervention in terms of reducing psychological distress in the profession. So that's been all kind of at the University of Surrey, but I guess more broadly, we've also tried to, so our copy license agreement allows us to share the course quite freely with whoever's interested, really, in terms of kind of non-for-profit resource. So we've kind of been liaising with VetLife, My Matters, British Equine Veterinary Association, and the British, I always get the acronym mixed up, but Small Animal Veterinary Association, and that's been really exciting because I think so we're doing various done various articles with them, and I guess repeatedly signposting to our free online course that's now available. And so working obviously with My Matters has been fantastic. So as part of that, My Matters have just launched, which I'll share with you in a minute, but have launched on their website a platform so you can access the course link through My Matters, essentially. So what that means is it then links you to a flyer that we've developed, and all the videos are linked in as YouTube links, basically, for the 14-day course. So you can kind of peruse them, use them how you wish, and essentially be able to also kind of people can dip in and out of, or just keep going back to as well, or signpost colleagues and friends too as well. So that's been particularly fantastic. And I guess within more broadly as well, outside of the vet sort of specific community, we've also kind of been sharing it in the sort of Compassionate Mind Foundation. So they're kind of the leading body of, or one of the leading bodies in compassion focused therapy work. So Sarah and I came second place in a poster presentation at their conference last October, which was really exciting in Birmingham. And I guess continuing to kind of share the resources on that platform. And we are currently in the process of kind of we've kind of submitted a paper in terms of kind of writing up the RCT paper for publication. So at some point in the near future as well, hopefully, that will be another paper that kind of will be, I guess, accessible as well in terms of kind of evidencing the really good quality work that's gone into the randomized control trial. So this is a little screen grab of essentially the flyer that we've got going around, which is linked on the My Matters website. And it basically obviously just explains anyone can access the course, it's evidence-based, why it's available, and what we ask if you are interested in accessing, which would really recommend. But it's linked in on the flyer, but completing a little questionnaire before and after, if you do kind of want to watch and engage with the videos. That's because we're kind of doing an ongoing, I guess, monitoring the impact within the community. So not a research project, but a just kind of ongoing service development project of monitoring, I guess, how many people are using the resource, is it being well received, us just being able to continually, I guess, keep an eye on, and in terms of ways we might be able to improve the impact of it if impact does kind of die off. And see, there you go, there's page shared flyer. So it quite clearly has the link you complete before and after, and then all the YouTube links available for the 14 videos over the 2 weeks. And so, yeah, if you look on the RCVS My Matters website on their resources section, which is linked in here, but is a whole web page specifically dedicated to this, which is really fantastic that they've done that and quite exciting. So you can go there, get more information about accessing the course if you want to, and then freely access it on a time frame that suits you, if and when that's helpful. So would really encourage you to do that if you are interested. And I think that's been a really great, I guess, practical kind of takeaway from the years now of research that's gone into this, which is really exciting. And certainly, I guess what has struck us repeatedly, and I guess was the clear rationale for the research, is repeatedly research is showing time and time again that within the veterinary population there are huge levels of distress and kind of growing mental health difficulties, but there hasn't been research in, okay, so what, and actually any research developing interventions to target that. So it's quite exciting to say we've been the first, or certainly the first that we're aware of, research team that's actually looked at developing a vet-specific mental health or kind of well-being focused intervention, and found it to be evidence-based, which is fantastic, and are now obviously kind of disseminating that as a free resource in the community. So yeah, we really hope that some of you listening will be interested and follow that through if you want to. So kind of coming up towards the end before we finish, wanted to also acknowledge Professor Chrissy Jones, who's been part of kind of providing overarching supervision of the project over the last couple of years, as well as obviously our colleagues in Mind Matters who've supported us. And yeah, we've got a bit of time now to think a bit about answering any questions. Is there anything particular people would like to hear more about?
Thank you both hugely. That was really insightful, and it's definitely got people thinking and contemplating for sure. So we will end there. Apologies to those people that we didn't get to for those questions, but we are running over time now, so we can't stay on any longer. But a huge thank you to Catherine and to Sarah for all of the work that you've done, and for being such great supporters of everything that we're doing in MMI. We're really delighted to see that this funding has translated into something that's so practical, so accessible, because that's what we're trying to do here from MMI's sort of strategic objectives. So this is a great example of bringing something to life. So for those of you who've joined us live here this evening, thank you very much for giving up your time and listening to this. Hopefully you will be able to make use of this resource or share it with other colleagues, friends, those who are wider within the industry. It would be excellent to hear your feedback on how you've accessed this, and also to make sure that that you are utilising all of the different resources that are available. We will keep you updated with further developments, so do make sure that you are on the MMI mailing list, or that you follow the different social media pages that we have, and absolutely with Catherine and Sarah's work, do please follow theirs as well. We're really looking forward to what you end up doing next, and hopefully it will be something that we can be involved in or collaborate with going forward. So we will end it there. Thank you both hugely, and we will no doubt see lots of people again for our next webinar, which we will share information about once we've got that available. So thank you both. Take care. Bye bye.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much.